us know when we're live streaming.
It's live.
Perfect. All right, Mr. Chair, if you want to start us off, we'll hopefully have
Okay, well, welcome everyone. We will get more people on as we go, and we hope to have our quorum in just a few moments. Rather than take more time for that, let's start with the information we can share, and then we'll go back.
Okay, so we'll start with item number 4 on the agenda, the staff update.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, sorry. Kat here from South Nation. And I just wanted to update you on a new climate station that we're installing within the city of Ottawa, just southwest of the community of Greeley. It's going to be installed on an SNC property. It gives us real-time information on precipitation, soil moisture, snow water equivalent due to snow, and then it transmits over the GO satellite network. So it comes directly into our water information system at SNC and allows us to use that information in our flood forecasting and warning programs. Next slide. An additional project that we've been working on is some new hydrologic model products. We were lucky enough to receive some Eastern Ontario Water Resource Program funding this year. Basically, this model, again, helps with forecasting water levels and flows for our flood forecasting and warning program. But by working with a quantity and developing some new inputs and infrastructure for the model, we can use it as more of a water budget and look at impacts to water resources due to changes in land use, changes in climate and precipitation, and that sort of thing. So that's a project that we've been working on in the last couple months. Next slide.
If there's any questions as we go along, just break in as we move.
Just 1 second before you start, Kat, we have a few more joining.
Okay.
Our chair, Fred and Elite, I see they've popped in. For those that have just joined us, we just started on item number 4, the staff update, while we were waiting for quorum. So we'll keep going. We do have quorum now, so we'll go back to the agenda approvals when we finish the slide deck.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm doing these slides on behalf of Sandra. Sandra sends her regrets. She's I was in a meeting with her with the City of Ottawa, and the meeting is still going on. So right now, I'm just going to give you an update about the low water conditions within the South Nation watershed. So these conditions that I'm about to present to you today are based on the data and the press release we issued back in August 13th. A lot has changed, and the water response team will be meeting next week, Thursday, 10th of September, so we could show them the new updated conditions. But for now, I'll just be presenting what we've issued in August 13th. So we had a very dry spring, and the dry spell went on to up until late July, and that caused our watershed to go into level 1 and then a level 2 low water conditions. And that really stressed some of our water courses, but we've received a great amount of rain actually in August, beginning of August all the way through till the end. And this shows you the precipitation data up to August 13th, where precipitation levels have improved, and we can see from the indicators shown in the table on the right. Next slide, please. So again, this is based off of August 6th. Things have changed since then, but when we issued the press release back in August 13th, we were looking at water gauges across the jurisdiction, looking at water levels, see how the rain has improved some of the water courses. And from the gauges that we have installed within our watershed, we can see the street or water courses in the closer to the headwaters need more water to recover. Meanwhile, water courses closer to the lower regions of the South Nation River and closer to the city of Ottawa replenished really quick. Next slide, please. So here I'm just put up some photos to show in different times, some in different times in different areas of our water in the South Nation watershed, just kind of to show what we do when we monitor. Different staff go out in the field to kind of take photos to see how the water courses have improved, or if there is no rain, how it's been affecting our water courses and the ecological conditions within the jurisdiction. So these pictures show some of the conditions in the upper South Nation region, which is the headwaters of the South Nation River. Next slide, please. This one is in the Castor River region. These have been taken closer to July 10th. So July 10th, that was around when the low water conditions were at its worst. That's when we issued a level 2 across the entire jurisdiction. As you can see from the photos, water is a bit mucky, and there's a bit of it looks like it's been still for a while, so things start going on top. Next slide, please. Over here, this is also right after a short period of rain, which did not improve the water courses too much, but kind of anything at that point was better than nothing. And this is in the Brook region. Next slide, please. And this would be the lower South Nation River region, closer to Alpha Plantagenet. Again, in July 21st, this was also during the level 2. You can see some areas, the water used to be a bit higher and it receded a bit. Closer to Plantagenet, though, just because of how wide the river is over there, you wouldn't notice as much impact as the smaller courses, but yet for that time of year, we've seen that it was affected. And in the picture on the right, after some substantial rain, you can see a bit of the grass coming back to life a bit there, and coming back to its like natural green color. So the communications department made this video for low water conditions, where it highlights some of the impacts that the watershed has endured during this time. I'm not sure if Carl, maybe you could play the video, or if you at everybody's own time, if you would like to watch it on YouTube, it's on the South Nation Conservation channel.
Rhonda, you're running the slide deck, so it's over
Oh,
to you.
here we go.
Is it playing for anyone else?
Playing on mine. Oh, well, you'll have to just visit our YouTube channel to see it. It was playing on my screen. Sorry, I didn't realize it wasn't playing on yours. We'll move to the next slide. Kat, I had muted you. There was some feedback, so you'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay, so we, for the last couple of years, we've been supporting the City of Ottawa in their baseline water quality monitoring program. And this includes 13 stations within the South Nation jurisdiction, within the City of Ottawa boundary. And stations exist across different, I guess, land uses. Some are in areas that are under significant development pressure, and then some are more, some sites are more naturalized or in agricultural settings. Data that we collect samples, take them to the City of Ottawa lab. They're analyzed for a suite of different parameters, and then that data helps a number of different studies, including the Catchment Studies, and we'll talk about some findings from several stations within this program later in the meeting.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll let you know that we've been lucky enough to actually get out and do some fish sampling during this COVID crisis. So we've been sampling the South Bear Brook catchment. So I think we have 10 locations. We're setting Windermere traps, and Naomi was out there last week. I think she caught up to 10 species. We're going out there again tomorrow to set our nets, and we'll be picking them up again on Thursday. Next slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is an update on the vernal pool monitoring. We have 3 months remaining of monthly monitoring at each of the 2 sites. There's a total of 10 pools that we're looking at, and of course, being that it was very dry this year, the pools dried up really quickly. So initially they had water in them in the springtime, and then I think by the end of May, we were looking at a pretty dry situation for most of the pools, and then by June they were all dry. So with the rains, when I was out the last time, I didn't see any water in any of the pools, but hopefully in September we'll see some water in them again. Next slide, please. We've also been looking after some invasives. There was a patch of Phragmites that was noticed at the Leitrim Boardwalk, and myself and Cheyenne and a couple of the summer students went out to do a treatment on it. So we went there. We also went to Bob Graham, and I'll be going out to Larose. There's so Leitrim and Larose and Bob Graham have been treated. They were treated a couple of years ago, and there was a few stalks that came back, more so at Bob Graham than at Larose. In this picture of Larose here, you can see most of the dead stalks are, there's very few of them that have leaves on them. So it looks like the treatment worked really well, but there's a few remnant stalks that I'm going to go back and treat just to make sure. We did the same thing at Bob Graham. And then Leitrim was a new one that we went back. The site is kind of hard to get into. It's off the boardwalk in an area that's kind of heavily vegetated, and the Phragmites is very tall, so a little bit difficult moving around in there, but we managed to cut most of the stalks, and we gave them a good treatment using the dabbing method. So we have the bingo dabbers. We empty them from the dye that they have in them, and then we add Roundup, and then cut the stalks and dab it onto the cut stem part. So hopefully we'll have good success with these, and we're trying to look after these sites. Of course, buckthorn is also an issue on a lot of our properties, and that's another one that we're going to be looking at, other method to control it. Next slide, please.
So under our partnership with OPG, we have a 3-year program that we're looking at. We're doing work on a couple of South Nation properties, and one of them is at the J. Henry Tweed Conservation Area in Russell. And through that work, we did a survey of the east boundary of the park just to confirm some lot lines, and also the boundaries of where we're going to be doing some of the erosion control work. And through that work, when one of our staff was out checking that survey work, this new invasive species was found in the park, Japanese spurge. And it looks like it was a kind of a garden escapee. It looked like someone had, it was kind of off the back of a lot where you could see it in the person's yard. So it may have been just, clippings or whatever. So it's just this small patch. So we're going to add it to our work plan to take care of that as well. So it does. Then maybe also couple that with some education or outreach with the surrounding landowners to just to let them know about it. So next slide, please. Also, as part of the OPG project, we were looking at the watercourse that runs through J. Henry Tweed, and we'd seen in the past some times when there was really high flows moving through there, and you know, higher than anticipated from normal rainfall events. So we started wondering, you know, what could be contributing to that. So we had staff out do some surveying upstream and at one of the subdivisions at their stormwater facility to take a look at if something was going on there. So we've been working with the municipality to look into that to see what can be done or what needs to be done. We've also put out level loggers at specific locations so that we could take a look at what that variation in flows is through that system, because that's what's contributing to a lot of the erosion in the park. So we want to be able to try and you know, stop that you know, the reason it's happening in the first place, as opposed to only fixing erosion and still have those high flows coming in. Okay. Next slide.
Have you developed
sorry.
a name for that stream?
Sorry, Fred, say that again, please.
Have you developed a name for that stream?
Oh, I don't think we've named anything. I know upstream it's the Little and Cherry Municipal Drain. So whether we call it Little and Cherry Creek, I guess we could, or J. Henry Tweed Creek. I'm not sure. We haven't decided on anything.
Good afternoon, everybody. So recently, Russell Township approached SNC after they received some concerns and calls from residents who lived along East York Creek through the town of Embrun. People were calling and concerned about excess erosion in this creek. They were worried about the water quality. They had questions about floodplain. So the township called us to look for some expertise. So last week or 2 weeks ago, SNC went out and some staff did a high-level assessment to take a look at the creek, see what we could figure out for the township and present them with a little bit of a suite of recommendations. So by taking a look at the creek, we found some great spots for tree planting and public education for the people that live along this creek. And we also identified a few locations where erosion is becoming a safety issue. So just like that, Russell Township liked what we put together, and they're now giving close to $17,000 to plant 140 potted and caliper-sized trees along this creek this fall already. So a good example of a quick turnaround by us to get some trees in the ground along a creek. Next slide, please. So SNC's
Bill asking, what kind of trees are you planting and how did you decide?
Yeah, so good question. After the locations for the tree planting were sort of sorted out and found, our forestry staff went out to the site and put together a real quick forestry plan for the, or a tree planting plan, almost as a proposal, and that was provided to Russell Township. Tree species included those which were already on site to sort of match the conditions on site and extend the forest that's there. So that includes sugar maple, I believe red maple, yellow birch, some cedar, hemlock, white spruce, and a few shrub species as well.
Thank you.
So drain classifications, SNC staff have been doing this kind of work for the last 5 or 6 years in a row with funding from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, or the DFO, where we'll go out to drains in our jurisdiction or in our municipality, partner municipalities that are unrated, and we will assess them for their flow condition in the middle of the summer, so how much water is going through the drain, as well as the species of fish that are in that drain. And then we'll provide that data to the DFO, who will then assign a class to each of those municipal drains. And then the class can be used to manage and plan maintenance for those drains into the future, so that they're maintained in a way that gets the water away when we want it to, but it also still provides habitat for the fish that are in those creeks.
Brent, before you leave this, tell us what you mean by unrated.
Yeah, so an unrated drain would be one that hasn't been assessed for flows or fisheries communities before. So no one's ever gone in and done a study to see what's going on in that creek, what kind of habitat it provides, and what kind of species live in it. So we don't know how to properly manage it. So for example, if we were to find a species such as northern pike in that drain, it may be classed a little bit more sensitively than one that doesn't have northern pike, so it will be managed in a way that northern pike aren't disturbed in the springtime.
Thank you.
So shoreline erosion projects, of course, with the flooding we've had the last number of years, we're getting a lot of these types of projects and going through our regulations and permitting process for people who want to alter their shorelines with riprap, large rock. The odd one will get planting some native species if we can convince them. But a few weeks ago, we were lucky to have 2 people from the DFO come out on site with SNC to take a look at a few shorelines in Castleman. So in this location next to a new subdivision, we invited the DFO out to take a look with us so that we could come up with a plan to make sure these people could protect their property, but also do it in a way that didn't impact fish habitat or the riparian vegetation. So on this day, we were out with DFO staff. We came up with a plan, and we were able to talk with the landowners and encourage them to also incorporate some native shrub and plants into their designs as well, so that we don't have just a rip-wrapped bank. And most people were open to doing that as part of their projects.
The WEPS project is ongoing, and we've been a partner for a number of years now. The part that I play is doing a vegetation survey. And this year it involved using plastic grid. And then I would estimate the biomass within the grid from the top of the slope down to the shoreline on the north side only. So there's paired subwatersheds in this project, and it's over near St. Albert's. I believe one of the farm owners is Mark LaFlèche, maybe a familiar name to some of you. And so I did a lot of walking, and it was very interesting to see what kinds of vegetation we often have growing along crop fields and along municipal drains after they do cleanouts. So a lot of it is looking at the nutrient uptake and nutrient runoff. They also have the controlled tile valves that they have installed along these drains, and they look at various things. And of course, they're looking at best management practices that can be taken on the farm fields. Thank you.
Hello again. So I've been busy working down on the Robert Graham Conservation Area. So that's down near Glen Stewart, which is down near Spencerville. So to date, I've installed 3 new culverts. 2 of them are brand new. One's a replacement. And then we've fixed about, or we're getting close to fixing about 600 meters of the trail down there. We had a forestry operation, I think it was last year, and the skidder made some pretty big ruts. So that's where 2 of the culverts are placed. Those ruts are actually almost acting like small vernal pools, believe it or not. So it's starting to get look really nice in there now, and it's a lot nicer to walk and to ride a bike. Next slide, please. So this slide, I guess it originates more than a few years ago. I guess it was Naomi and myself. We started. Well, we were getting a lot of calls in regards to the fish sanctuaries. We were getting some calls about it. In regards to the wording. So we worked with MNR at the time, actually MNR Conservation Officer Art Gamble, and we came up with the exact same wording that comes out of the fishing regulations. So I think the reason why it kind of fell by the wayside in the first place was we were having a bit of difficulty determining where to put these. So long story short, we've got one set up down in Spencerville, sorry, not Spencerville, Chesterville. That was the first spot. We still have Chrysler 2 set up and Plantagenet we were getting a lot more fishing actually down Chesterville, right off the bridge, and within that 27 meters that you're not allowed to fish. So it's pretty dangerous. There was a lot of young kids down there, so we decided to put up some more signs. So there's no fishing within the 27 meters below the bridge, sorry, the dam, and as well as that fish sanctuary that's just below the dam. Thank you.
If you'll remember at the last meeting in June, we talked briefly about a new conservation area that we're developing in Augusta Township. So it's a piece of property that the township donated to South Nation, and we're going to be doing some upgrades there so that it could become a nice conservation area as well as a river access point at the upper end of the river, which is a nice spot to get in to launch a canoe to go check out that section of the river. So what we've been doing lately is Naomi and Brent both went out and they did some habitat assessments, some looking at wildlife, looking at the plants, looking at kind of an overall picture of the property from an ecological perspective. And then we're also in the middle of an archaeological assessment as well of the property because there are some known sites in that area. So we wanted to make sure we cover all of our bases for this. We have our ideal kind of layout for the parking lot as well as the trail is complete. So obviously, depending on the assessments, that may, not necessarily the parking lot, but the trail, where we locate the trail might vary a little bit. And the nice part too is we're getting some in-kind support from Augusta Township in terms of helping with the construction of the parking lot. So it's a really good partnership project as well. So we'll hopefully have a new conservation area down in that neck of the woods in the next little while, and a nice new river access point as well. So there'll be more coming on this one in the next months.
Good afternoon, everyone. South Nation Conservation is working with several of our First Nation and First Nation Working Group partners on a reconciliation and climate tree planting project. We'll be planting the Healing Place on September 23rd, so in a few weeks, at one of our South Nation properties near Shanley. It was recently acquired. I see Abraham's on the call with us. Abraham's one of the folks working hard with us to bring this event to fruition. We have also some funding support coming from Ontario Power Generation, Force Ontario, the Assembly of First Nations, and a few other sponsors. So we'll have some additional information out to committees shortly on the event. It is an outdoor event, so we will be able to host some guests on site for the tree planting, and we're just sorting those logistics out now. So we'll send around an invite shortly for this if anyone's interested in attending. Abraham, well, I have the slide up. Is there anything you'd like to add? I see that you're on, but you're muted. Okay. I think that concludes our slideshow. So we do now have quorum, and our chair is joined us as well. So I'm going to switch slide decks. And Mr. Chair, we can start with your opening remarks if you'd like. And I'd like to thank Bill for stepping in for you before the slideshow.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I have any opening remarks beyond what I sent in the email. Bill makes a much better chair than I do. Yeah, we haven't gotten out and done as much as we ought to have. We always seem to miss. These droughts are the best time to go out and look for mussels, and we always seem to blow it when there's a drought on. But we did do the branches of the Castor River, and found that they were quite a lot like municipal drains. Yeah, so we're supposed to be doing mussels in the Castor River and Bear Brook, but we haven't gotten out to do that.
Not yet.
Well, October maybe. We're going upstream along the Ottawa River to New Liskeard, supposedly leaving tonight if we've got the connection.
Bear with me, I'm just trying. My slide deck for some reason doesn't want to share, so I'm going to share it a different way instead. Give me 1 second. Do it this way. Perfect. All right. We do not have a supplemental today, so we'll just be looking for approval of the agenda.
Bill, so moved.
Thank you. And I see Malcolm's hand went up. Thank you, Malcolm. Okay, Mr. Chair, I think it might be easier instead of asking for approval if we just ask if there are any objections, so we can call that question for approval of the agenda.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say, if there's any objections.
Seeing none, we can move on. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Hearing none, we've already gone through the South Nation presentation. We can move on to roundtable community engagement. If any members have any news they would like to share from their organization or opportunities that they've had to present South Nation programs or services, I'll open it up to the floor.
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, I'll just make a couple of comments. It's Bill. For your information, I keep in pretty good contact with board members and with committee chairs. And one of the things to let you know about is the board is planning to meet in person using and taking advantage of all of the rules and all the things we should or should do at the September meeting, which is the third Thursday of this month. There will be no visitors. We will be live streaming it, and presentations will be made by staff in the usual way. So it'll just be the board members scattered around the room and following all the rules that are there. And we're trying it out to see how it is. Now, I've had a question from some of the board chairs about will we be able to, and even for this meeting, would we be able to have the meeting in person? And the answer is not planned at this time. At this time, we're going to see how the board meeting goes, and then we'll talk about it and talk with you. And at the moment, further meetings are planned to be virtually, or as we're doing now, but that could change as time goes on and we see how the next few months go along. I might just say when I'm speaking that I want to give lots of thanks to the board staff, not the board, but the staff of South Nation for the work they've done working from home. About a third of them are now coming in regularly to the office. A heck of a number of them are working in the field, and there's been a lot achieved and a lot accomplished, and they've adapted the way they're doing things, and I'm very proud of what they've done and how they've been doing it. So thank you and well done, and keep up the good work, and this will pass in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Abraham, your microphone's live. Did you have something to add?
I'm just a minor thing. I don't know what's going on with my Microsoft Teams, but it's not allowing me to like have any control over anything. I hate to pull away from the meeting at all. I don't know. It's just not working correctly. So if you could just mute me.
Sure, I can mute you, and just raise your hand, Abraham. I can't unmute you from our end, but your feed seems to be coming through okay at my end.
Like there's no tools on my Microsoft Teams for some reason. I don't know what happened, so I can't even unmute myself or raise my hand or any sort of action here.
Okay, the new Microsoft Teams moved the menu bar to the top right, so I'm not sure if it's showing up on the top right of your screen.
Nope. No.
Okay, I'm going to mute you. If you have a question, feel free to add it to the chat, and I'll.
I don't even have the chat.
Okay.
I'll just go like this over here, but
okay, sounds good. I'll mute you now. Thanks, Abraham. Okay, are there any others that have community engagements they would like to share? If not, Mr. Chair, we can move on to item 6, which is the approval of the June 2nd committee meeting minutes.
Okay. That's it.
So they're on page 3 of your package.
One modification to that is that Olita is credited as Bishop's Mills Natural History Center, but we're both Fragile Inheritance Natural History now.
Okay, I will make that note. Thank you. And if there are no corrections or edits to the minutes, we'll be looking for a mover and seconder to approve the minutes from June. Kirk?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I think we had two at the same time. Who was this? I have Kirk moving, and I just need a seconder. Bruce?
Rhonda, Larry Smith.
Larry? I
I
think we had Bruce, Larry, so I'm going to catch you on the next one.
That's fine.
Right, thank you. All right. Moving on to business arising. One thing I know we did mention we were going to try and bring for this meeting was an update on the Emerald Ash Borer Wasp release program. Chris, who would normally give the presentation, is actually off on holidays this week. We are still awaiting results from the work that was done. So we don't actually have any data to share yet. So we're hoping that we'll have information for our November meeting. So I will put it on the agenda for November for an update on that project. And I believe that was the only minute arising that I had.
Yeah, I just want to say that as we sort of drive through the South Nation drainage, the emerald ash borer is obviously doing a huge amount of damage to the ashes, and it seems to be less where there's bigger forests. And I wonder if it's a function of the density of woodpeckers, and if that's being taken into consideration in any way in thinking about the spread of the ash borer.
I'm not sure. I'll mention that question to Chris, and perhaps if we have any information, we can include that in November.
Okay.
Just making a note for myself. Okay.
I'm not sure if this helps any, but let me add, as I drive along the roads, I'm constantly surprised and disappointed by the number of ash ice tree dying or dead along the roads in all of our municipalities, as well as stands of bush.
And there's also the Ottawa problem, because the ashes died first in Ottawa, and then you get this sea of cathartic buckthorn coming in under them. And that's something that we need to think about is, we've got our best trees dying and then our worst invasive coming in under them. And at least in South Nation properties, maybe we should look at doing some experimental, dabbing control, as Naomi was talking about.
For the buckthorn, Fred, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to see if there's some way, because in late October and November in Ottawa, you see all these dead ash trees, and then there's this sort of green cumulus layer below them of the buckthorn that's come in underneath them, and that's not doing anybody any good.
I see Abraham has his hand up, but I can't unmute you, Abe. No, you're still muted. If you email it to me, I can read it out. Just on the dabbing, we have done it on a couple of sites for South Nation. We do have some work planned under our OPG 3-year project as well at 2 of our Ottawa parcels, the Garland Side Road and the Gamble properties. We are looking at doing some ash removal and buckthorn control on those sites. So hopefully we'll have some additional sites that we can use sort of as test sites moving forward. So part of what that project was looking at doing is again showing how this cut and dab method could be effective. I think we might, did we get Abe back? Hey, Abe, you're unmuted. There you go.
I think I just got to restart my program every time I want to say something. Yeah, so in regards to like black ash trees, my approach may not be broadly accepted. For Akwesasne, somewhere about 45 to 50% of our forest biomass is black ash or some sort of ash variety. And I actually don't see any sort of benefit other than coordinating with another First Nations community that has islands that are at least 3 miles from their shoreline, that we could have a repository of black ash trees growing out there, or some white ash and green ash and whatnot, because they can't, the emerald ash borer can't travel more than 3 miles. Because and the injections are quite expensive. But my main concern around the emerald ash borer coming into our territory here, I haven't noticed buckthorn, but is the hazard to community members being in the forest, and that it's sort of on this 20-year schedule. So when they first arrive, within 20 years, like sort of that black ash stand will be eliminated, and I don't know how soon they'll be able to get the trees out there that are resistant. So this is just from my personal. So I think that it's important that we consider the removal of the black ash trees and a suitable replacement from a biomass perspective, and until further research has been completed on the ability of one having some sort of resistance to the emerald ash borer, I don't know how costly it would be to save very many, other than just a few with those regular injections. That's just kind of my perspective on those, just because I am concerned about community and some of these trees becoming an environmental hazard.
Thank you, Abe. Kirk, do you have something to add?
Yeah, just more of a question. We've been cutting down ash trees here that are, and what I've started to do is leave the new sprouts. I thin them out, but leave the new sprouts that are coming up. And I've got some now that are, say, 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and they're lush green. There's nothing wrong with them. Does anybody know? Does that mean anything? Does it mean that they maybe became tolerant, or being the second generation of these original trees, or is it they'll just die in another year? Does anybody have any ideas or comments on that?
Well, I think they're just sprouts that aren't big enough for the ash borers to move into yet. And what Abraham was saying about black ash and saving black ash populations, I don't know if the black ash sprout the way the green ash do after the ash borers mostly killed the tree. But, with the American chestnut, for 100 years after it's out, there's been sprouts from and looking at it. We should be looking at it from the ashes, and that's what we're going to do on our land. Is we've got some special ash trees, and we're going to fell the main trunk and leave the sprouts base how they fare.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I was getting a bit of feedback there, so just I muted you again, Abe. Hopefully you can unmute, and I muted Kirk. So hopefully that took care of the feedback. Okay, great. And again, we'll bring the topic back in November and hopefully have some additional information on the work that was done with the wasps in our area here. So we move on to the monitoring update. Item number 7A.
All right, thank
Sorry,
you. All right, so this report is an update to the one that was brought to you back in June, which summarized some of our monitoring activities for this year and gave you some idea of the impacts on the scheduling and the operation of those activities due to the pandemic. So just to go through kind of the report, just some updates on some of the work we've been doing. So in terms of biological community sampling, we have been doing fish sampling, as you saw in the slideshow. So we were able to do the trap nets for the South Bear Brook Catchment Study, and that was our plan from the beginning for that study. So there was no real impact there for us. And when the two staff are out, you know, setting the nets and gathering the nets back in and going through the fish, we're able to keep that physical distancing between staff and adhere to everything in our operating procedures that have been developed. The municipal drain classification work that Brent mentioned, we did do electrofishing for that methodology. So it did involve staff being obviously closer. We can't electrofish effectively when you're 2 meters apart. So we were closer together, but staff wore face masks. When traveling in vehicles together, face masks are worn. So, you know, and the staff were comfortable with the electrofishing. If that wouldn't have been possible, then we would have been able to also do the trap netting. It's allowable under that drain sampling protocol. So we did have an alternative if it was needed. Luckily, we were able to do the electrofishing. It's the most efficient and an effective way to get the sampling completed. The next sampling that's coming up in the fall will be our benthic invertebrate sampling. And we always do this in the fall. We use nets to collect the invertebrates basically by kicking up the substrate. The work does require 2 staff. However, again, we're able to separate physically. So we won't have any difficulty adhering to the SOP, the operating procedures. So we think that should go along smoothly. Water quality sampling has been a little bit altered. The Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Network is our long-standing water quality sampling program in partnership with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. It typically runs from April to November with samples collected monthly from 14 different stations within the watershed. And we send those to the ministry lab for detailed analysis. So unfortunately, that program's been on hold because the lab is still closed due to the pandemic. So we don't have that program running right now. And again, the Provincial Groundwater Monitoring Network, similar type of program, but this one looks at obviously groundwater as opposed to surface water. It's again a partnership with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. The ministry lab there again normally completes an analysis of water quality samples that we collect at those wells. So that's not happening. However, under this program, we are still doing routine maintenance and manual water level readings at the wells. So that portion of the program is still happening as normal. It's just that water quality analysis piece that won't be happening this year. And then through a special levy from the City of Ottawa, like Kat mentioned, we are completing water quality sampling with the city, or sorry, in certain locations within the City of Ottawa. The program was reduced a little bit. It didn't start until July, but it is, as of now, it is happening monthly as per normal. So and again, it's not a problem for the 2 staff that are out doing the sampling to keep that physical distancing and adhere to all our safety procedures. City Stream Watch is another program that we had to modify. It's usually a volunteer-based program and involves walking a length of the watercourse, and you record morphological characteristics of the watercourse. You identify areas in need of stewardship activities. So that work we put on hold with outside volunteers, but we're still hoping to complete some of it with our own staff. So we've modified the data collection portion of the program. So we're using a new app. Brent actually worked pretty hard to set up an app on Survey 123 so that we could take our field PC out with us and easily input all the data. So we're going to be looking at that work in the next few weeks, starting with certain sites in the South Brook catchment where we can have fairly easy access, and where we know we've got some areas where we're interested in the data. So we're going to try that with strictly just staff going out and doing that work. And then invasive species was another kind of monitoring component we've been doing. Naomi was out earlier in the season doing a lot of the distribution mapping on certain SNC properties. So like Rhonda mentioned, the Gamble property, the Garlandside Road property, those are 2 that we're looking at for some of the invasive species work, and that's under our OPG grant. And then Naomi was also out, like she mentioned, in Leitrim, Robert Graham Conservation Area, those out in La Rose, checking out those projects. So that work continued because the monitoring piece is a single staff going out. So it was very easy to be able to do that while following all of our health and safety procedures. So that's the update on the monitoring, where we're at right now, and we'll keep you up to date in November if anything else has changed or kind of what the outlook is looking like for the rest of the year. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a receive and file motion on page 9, and I have Larry moving, and I just need a seconder to receive and file. Malcolm, thank you. And Mr. Chair, if there's no questions, you can call your question.
Are there objections?
Hearing none, that resolution is carried, and we'll move on to the next report on page 11 of your package. And we do have a PowerPoint presentation from Kat and Brent to go along with this report.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I guess we'll do the report first, Rhonda, then, and then the presentation. Sorry, is that sort of?
Yep, that's fine. I think somebody,
Okay.
Ed has his hand up. Is there something? Question, Ed? Oh, you're muted if you have a question. Oh, no, we just lost him. Okay, well, we'll go. Okay, we'll go ahead with the report, Kat, and
okay.
We'll then move to the slideshow.
Okay, great. Yeah, so SNC has been working with the City of Ottawa the past couple of years on catchment studies. So basically going into specific catchments and trying to characterize them in terms of water quality and water quantity. And this is in order to support sub-watershed planning activities. So we have 2 catchment studies that we're currently working on. The North Castor catchment, we're just wrapping that one up. We collected data in 2018 and 2019. We've spent 2020 on doing some of the analysis and writing up the report. The report has gone into City of Ottawa and been reviewed, and we've taken their comments into account and gone through sort of another editing session there. So we're looking to have that report completely wrapped up within the next couple of weeks. And we'll get to that presentation in a minute. The South Bear Brook catchment, that study just started in 2020. So we've just started our baseline data collection. So we've been able to move ahead with water quality sampling, temperature sampling. We've been looking at the biological communities, and then we'll be looking to identify important base flow contribution areas. I believe the only thing that underwent sort of a schedule change was our headwater drainage feature sampling. So that will be moved to 2021. So I guess we can move ahead with the presentation of findings for our North Castor catchment study.
All right, so I'll start us off on this. What we kind of wanted to do at the beginning of this was to give you a little bit of background on the watershed planning process. So watershed planning, it's basically a framework for discovering, documenting, and then protecting or enhancing our natural heritage features and our natural resources. So there's some goals to this process. Obviously, it's to inform land use planning. So especially in our urban areas where we know there's high development pressures, you know, that this planning will help to inform where some of that land use will occur or should occur, where certain areas that should be protected. It also helps prepare management plans for the areas, and it helps protect water quantity and water quality, which is obviously very important. So the watershed planning process has 3 phases. So the phase 1 is the existing conditions, and that's where our catchment studies fit in. So it's looking at that catchment or that sub-watershed and really taking a close look at the conditions of that, characterizing that sub-watershed, that catchment, looking at you know, the fish, water quality, base flow, looking at land use, looking at forest, wetlands, all those features together, really understanding that catchment in a detailed way. And then you also kind of set up how you want to move forward with that information. So what are the objectives in that catchment? What are some of the goals and targets for those natural heritage features that we want to see? And that leads into phase 2, which is where you really look at the, here it says, impact scenarios for that subwatershed. So you look at different land use scenarios, different land management objectives, and how that's going to affect the catchment. And all that stuff is informed by the data or the information that we collected in phase 1. So you really look at the catchment as a whole to assess potential impacts on that scale, on that catchment scale. So, and then the results you get out of that will inform the goals for then watershed planning and land use planning. And that's where subwatershed plans fit in. And then the third phase is implementation of those plans. So, where you come up with how are you going to implement it, how is it going to meet provincial policy direction, how is it going to meet local official plan directions as well, and then also you want to build in how that's going to be monitored, whatever you do, how you're going to keep track of what was done, how it's working, provide that adaptive management piece too as well. So if something's not working, how are you going to change it? What's going to be the cycle for review of these plans and updates as needed? Because ultimately we really want the recommendations coming out of these plans to be solid and to be able to be implemented on the ground, so that we can see some positive change in those catchments, or some important features protected or enhanced where appropriate. So next slide, please. So like I said, our catchment studies are phase 1 of that process. So we're really doing that detailed look at the catchment, collecting that baseline information and doing those analyses so we know and we can understand the health of the catchment, look at trends, identify areas that are maybe need improvement or areas that are in excellent health. So it's really an integrated look at the catchment. And we've been focusing with the City of Ottawa in areas under development pressure, because those are the areas that we want to know right now what's happening before those developments move in, so that we have a really good understanding of the habitat, of the features, and it can actually help inform some of that land use planning, especially now that the City of Ottawa is undergoing an urban expansion. So to really be able to have a good idea of the catchment ahead of that is so key for that. So what we've been also doing in our catchment studies is we've been including really great suites of recommendations for projects or land use things, or different policy direction maybe that could be done within that catchment to really protect those important features that we've identified or that the City of Ottawa has identified that are important for the health of the catchment. So those recommendations are really important. We try to make them very strong as well, and carry them through to the subwatershed planning process. Next slide.
Okay, so this is actually the second catchment study that we've worked on with the city. The first one being McKinnon's Creek. That one we worked on in 2016, 2017 around the community of Orleans there within the city. Here, the North Castor, we've been working on this one, again, fieldwork in 2018, 2019. And the location of this catchment is sort of along Bank Street, around the communities of Finley Creek and Greeley. So sorry, those are the headwaters. And then the river flows in an eastern direction through more of an agricultural landscape just north of Metcalfe, joining up with the Castor River near the community of Russell. And then, of course, it flows on to the South Nation River and then to the Ottawa River near Plantagenet. So in this map here, you can see that there's a little piece of the urban boundary of the city, and then the majority of the catchment falls within the rural boundary. That being said, there are some pretty developed areas in the rural communities there. But this is a map of the breakout of subcatchments within the North Castor. So within the report, when we're looking at various features, we try to kind of explain them on a subcatchment basis. So Again, we have Finley Creek, that one's in purple. The headwaters of Finley Creek, again, being that Finley Creek community within the city of Ottawa. The Shields Creek is sort of covers the community of Greeley. That subcatchment's orange. Ebbers Creek is a smaller catchment. I believe it's only about 5 kilometers squared in area. And then we have Black Creek, that's that teal color. And of course, all of them contribute to the greater North Castor catchment. The North Castor catchment is about 125 kilometers squared. I guess we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so for these studies, we really look at them from the ground up. Of course, geology informs water resources, and then it also informs land use. For these catchment studies, we look at bedrock geology, surficial geology. We look at the hydrologic functioning of soils, so which soils are good for infiltration versus which soils experience a lot of runoff. There's just a couple things I wanted to highlight for you in this slide. I wanted to kind of draw your attention to the maroon coloring of the glaciofluvial deposits on the west side of the catchment. Thanks, Rhonda. So that feature is really key because that's the area where we're seeing a lot of groundwater inputs that are really important for the maintenance of base flow within this entire river catchment. Another feature I kind of wanted to point out to you would be those teal colors, the organic deposits. That's where you'll see a lot of the wetland habitat within this catchment. That Paleozoic bedrock that within the Finley Creek subwatershed, that's actually now a large quarry organized by or maintained by Lafarge. And then further down in the catchment, that light blue color, that's our clay plain surficial geology, and our clay plains are some of the best best agricultural soils, and so that's where we tend to see a lot of agriculture now within this catchment. I think we can go to the next slide. So I kind of went over land use within the catchment, but again, just in terms of percent coverage, agriculture is the largest land use at 42%. And again, we see more ag in that clay plain areas in the lower part of the catchment, whereas the headwaters within Finley Creek and Shields Creek, you can see the amount that they're becoming further developed and with an urban expansion, we'll see a little bit more. I don't know if I think that was about it for this slide, because we're going to talk a little bit more about wetlands, I think, coming up here. So again, those organic deposits led to a lot of our provincial wetlands. So you can see the Lester Road wetland, Leitrim, and then the Osgood complex and North Osgood complex in the south. So those are our provincially significant wetlands within this catchment. There's a lot of unevaluated wetlands within the catchment. And so, you know, some larger unevaluated areas, but mostly smaller kind of remnant wetlands. And likely there was more wetland cover within that clay plain area pre-European settlement. But as we changed the landscape to make room for agriculture, a lot of those wetlands in the lower areas were probably lost. But we are sitting at approximately 14% wetland cover within the this catchment, and minimum guidelines by how much habitat is enough for wetland cover is 10%. So we're doing pretty well. but I think Brent will highlight later in the presentation the need to maybe get out and do some more wetland evaluations. So next slide. If we overlaid kind of wetlands and forest cover together, you'd notice that that a lot of the forest cover within this catchment comes from those wetlands. One thing we noticed is there's not a lot of there's actually not a lot of sort of large forest blocks that lend themselves well to interior forest. Just actually have to get the stat here. I wrote it down in terms of where we're at for forest cover. So overall forest cover within the catchment is at about 23%. And so again, looking at how much habitat is enough, that's a series of studies that sort of amalgamated by Environment and Climate Change Canada. They recommend, or they say that 30% minimum forest cover equates to a high-risk approach that may support about half of potential species richness in the area. So I know we always kind of aim for that 30% within the South Nation jurisdiction, and so this catchment is falling under that recommendation, and just also to note that we have seen from 2008 to 2014 we saw about 2 kilometers squared of forest loss. We weren't able to get the new kind of 2020 results into this study. The area has been flown for imagery, but we haven't completed that GIS kind of desktop GIS exercise yet to determine what forest cover is existing sort of in 2020, but we expect to see further forest cover loss within this catchment. And again, for interior forest, I believe the percent is about 3% interior forest, and the recommendation by Environment and Climate Change Canada again is about 10%. So we're well below that guideline value here. Next slide. So the other feature that we look at is riparian cover, and we're of course really interested in riparian cover because we know that it provides important linkages across the landscape and also really helps protect aquatic resources. The recommendation for riparian cover is to have on 30 meters on either side of your stream to be vegetated, to be in about 75% natural cover. And so you can see the percentages here broken out by subcatchment in terms of where we're at 4% riparian cover. So we're pretty, we're fairly under that 75% target. Next slide. Okay, so moving on, one of the other sort of features we look at for these climate studies, for these catchment studies is water quantity. And so we try to characterize water quantity during kind of that low flow, base flow type conditions to highlight areas where we have important groundwater inputs, maintaining that base flow. And then the other time of year that we're really wanting to characterize our water within the Finley Creek and North Castor catchment, the floodplain mapping, the regulatory 100-year floodplain has recently been updated. And I believe we're still looking to finalize that through an open house. But that analysis has been completed. Through that project, we also mapped out the 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, 25-year, 50-year, and 350-year floodplain storm events and floodplains as well. So those products exist in separate reports outside of the catchment studies, but they also would contribute to a subwatershed plan for the North Castor catchment. In addition to that, hazard lands were also mapped, looking at potential for erosion. And now I'm going to pass things on to Brent.
Before you leave, it's Bill. Can I get a question of you, Catherine? I'm
Sure.
looking back at the riparian cover slide you showed us, and I heard your comment about 30 meters in each side of the stream, and I heard that we're well below in each, and then you threw out a figure of 75%. I'm not sure I know how that worked in.
Oh, sure. So the recommendation by How Much Habitat is Enough is that 75% of that area that encompasses 30 meters on either side be naturally vegetated. So we've gone and calculated the percent forest cover within that 30-meter buffer on either side. And typically, I think for the North Castor, for most subsheds, we're hitting around the 25% mark, when the recommendation is 75%, which is a pretty lofty goal. So and might not be achievable, especially around municipal drains. But
yeah, and as a herpetologist, I'm obliged to say that your main criterion for stream health is the presence of salamanders, and there are two-line salamanders that have been found in Shields Creek, and that should be a very important consideration in evaluating the watershed.
Okay, so base flow, I'm going to talk about a little bit here, and a couple ways we identified that. So first off, base flow in a creek, when we talk about base flow, that is the amount of water that's in a stream or creek or river in the middle of summer after we haven't had any rain for 3 days in a row. And that water level is as low as it's going to get. And then at that point we can then say that the creek's at base flow levels and all the water in that creek is contributed from groundwater seepage only. So we know that there's no surface water or rainfall water that got into that creek. So when we're measuring base flow, it's basically water that's coming right out of the soil and not from rainfall. So we did this 3 ways and for different reasons. We wanted to find out where groundwater was entering these streams, because those are areas of specialized habitat. There's often going to be colder water because groundwater is colder than our rainfall water and our surface waters that are heated up in things like stormwater ponds and municipal drains. And there'll be specialized species of fish and benthics there that will only thrive in cold water habitats. So to identify these locations, on the top right there, you can see us doing some base flow monitoring. This type of monitoring actually, it takes staff going out, measuring flows at all these different cross sections throughout the catchment, and then we can look at the actual volume of water passing a specific location at one time versus another location, and we can see where there's been gains or losses in the stream. So if groundwater is coming in between one area and another, we'll see a gain in the actual volume of water going through the creek. So that's a more of a quick way, but in the field, it's very intensive, takes a lot of work to do. Another one that we did on the left, you'll see a model output. This is SNC's hydrogeosphere model. So our engineering staff were able to run this model for the North Castor subwatershed. And the way this model works, actually, I can't tell you how it works. It's complex, but it basically puts out a map that shows us all the locations that are predicted areas of groundwater seepage coming into our creeks based on the underlying geology of the areas. So we could take that map then and have an estimation of where to go in the field to do our base flow monitoring. And the third way, that's an interesting one in the bottom right, is radon sampling. So this is relatively new to SNC to do this kind of work. And basically works on the principle of we know that there's radon in the bedrock naturally. It comes from elements of uranium that actually decay and become elements or atoms of radon in the soil. And radon can be concentrated into groundwater. So by taking water samples and measuring the concentration of radon in those water samples, we can then find out areas where groundwater might be coming into the creek, because we'll see an increase in the amount of radon found at those specific locations. So We went all over the watershed, took all these different water samples, measured the radon concentration, and then mapped the concentrations that we were able to see. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the some of the results for our radon monitoring. We did a suite of samples across the watershed. They're represented by the dots there, the different color dots, and the sizes, and the color shows the average concentrations of radon within those water samples. So at the bottom left, the very headwaters of Shields Creek, where our model showed us that groundwater is likely coming in, our underlying geology is it's one that favors having groundwater upwellings. We did see a high concentration of radon in those groundwater samples, or those surface water samples. So sort of had the same thing going on up in Finley Creek in the top left. You see higher up in the watershed, where those two lighter blue circles are, we had a higher concentration or a spike in radon where we thought groundwater must be coming up in those locations. And again, that's we have good confidence in this because it matches up with what our model said, as well as some of our other monitoring programs like the base flow that we did in stream. Next slide, please. So another way we measured water quantity in this catchment is through doing headwater drainage feature sampling. So this is a protocol that our staff have been doing each spring. You go out and you take photos and document some of the features that are holding water in the springtime, and then we'll go back in the fall or in the summer and take a look at those sites again to do it again, take photos and document the features. And this gives a really good idea of those locations in the catchment where water is being held back in the spring and being slowly released throughout the summer. And these are locations that we won't be able to find over the rest of the year. So you can see the difference in these two photos. If you were just to go look at this little wetland in the summer, it's pretty near dried up. And we wouldn't be able to tell that actually a lot of water is being held there in the spring. These are things we should protect into the future and maybe not put a parking lot there because there's obviously a lot of water in that location in the spring. Next slide. And here's just a map of some of those findings. So with the data we collect from doing our spring and fall or spring and summer headwater drainage feature sampling, we then will assign a different management recommendation to each of those features we find on the landscape. So this just shows overall the whole catchment and some of the different sort of management recommendations we're providing the City of Ottawa for these locations. So some where maybe it's a sensitive habitat such as a wetland that's holding a lot of our spring water and helping with flood control and things like that, we'll assign a conservation status to that specific feature so that it's protected a little bit more into the future, or hopefully protected, whereas there are some that are maybe determined to not be as important as a conveyor of sediment and water on the landscape. They might require just simple replication through some sort of offsetting or a mitigate. We'll ask for something else through the whole planning whenever a subdivision is going in. So different management for different types of features allows development to go through, but in a sustainable way.
Mr. Chair, through you, I have a couple of questions. I'm level at some of these, so I just missed as you were talking. What is radon? Why are you monitoring it? And I think I have part of that. And is it always the same in the areas? And does it? I know there's different amounts from different areas, but you may want to comment on that too.
Sure, Bill. So radon's an element, just like oxygen or hydrogen. It's in our periodic table of the elements, and it's one that we find in high concentrations in bedrock. And specific areas have higher amounts of radon than others. So if you have been following the news out in Canada and Barhaven area in the past number of years, they've been having a lot of issues with radon gas leaking into basements. So those are areas where the bedrock's close to the surface of the soil. People with basements there that may have a crack in it, they'll get radon gas in, and this can cause health issues for people that are exposed to that. But what's good for us actually monitoring groundwater is that radon can concentrate in groundwater. So if we find areas where there's a lot of radon concentration in our streams, we have a pretty good, we can make the assumption that we're probably pretty close to an area where that groundwater is entering the stream. So we want to document those areas and make sure that they're protected into the future and have adequate buffers and riparian areas so that they're not disturbed into the future, because those areas provide very specific habitat of cold water and high oxygen for fish and benthic invertebrates.
Thank you. Supplementary, is it dangerous? You sort of indicated it's dangerous to your health. In what way? And is it dangerous if you drink it or inhale it, or in what way?
Yeah, so I know radon gas is certainly not good in high concentrations. I'm not an expert on the effects of inhaling radon gas, but cancer is a concern for people that have high concentrations of radon gas within their homes. So it is a very real thing in, like I said, areas near Canada. There's places, well, it'd be all over our continent where there's high concentrations of radon gas. You'll actually hire a technician to come in and make sure you don't have radon gas leaking into your basement. In terms of in the water, the concentrations by the time it gets into the water are so low that drinking it isn't a concern. The other thing about radon gas in the water, it's concentrated in the water, but it actually only takes, I think, a period of hours to days for it actually to dissipate or gas out of the water into the air anyways. So it's not a concern for us in our drinking water.
What kinds of bedrock are most problematic for radon?
Yeah, that's not something I know the answer to, but I don't know if it's specific to the types of bedrock as it is just to locations where there's high levels of radon exist in some locations. I'm not sure.
Well, it comes from granitic bedrock that has uranium in it decaying. And the question that I've been sort of wondering about, and that the health authorities don't say anything about, is to what extent it happens, to what extent it's a threat over thick layers of limestone bedrock, or if it's just when you're right on granite that it gets into basements. But I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, these are things I'm not sure of either, but measuring radon in water through a lot of research that Kat has done with and talking to universities that are employing this method. While it's not good for our health, it's a great way to find out where groundwater is coming into our streams. So it's kind of a new thing, and we're using it, and it's working pretty well for us, and it's matching up with what our models are telling us as well. So as you said, Fred, it comes from the decay of uranium. Radon actually does eventually become lead over about 4.46 billion years. So we don't have to, I've said that one a couple of times, we don't have to worry about radon becoming lead in our lifetimes, but it's interesting how the chemistry works for that.
Thank you so much for the extra comments, Brent.
Yeah, that was great, Brent. Awesome. So some of the other features that we look at is around water quality. And we have a couple of different tools that we use to do that. As we talked about in the staff update, we help administer the City of Ottawa baseline water quality program. And it's kind of, I guess, beneficial that four of those stations are within the North Castor catchment. So we have 2 sites on Finley Creek, 1 site on Shields Creek, and then another site further downstream of the confluence of Finley and Shields within the North Castor River. And there's about 10 years worth of data on those stations. So we take those samples and submit them to the City of Ottawa lab. It's an accredited lab, and they analyze it for a number of different parameters. Next slide. Some of the analysis that we do is, first of all, we define baseline conditions, and typically folks will take the 75th percentile of the entire data record and kind of characterize that as baseline conditions. And then we take that number and we compare against known water quality guidelines. And those are either Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Park guidelines or the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment. And we look at sort of the magnitude and I guess percentage of exceedances. And when you have enough data, you can start doing some trend tests. So we use something called a seasonal Mann-Kendall trend test, and we applied that to specific parameters. Next slide. So just again, some high level findings. What we saw when we looked at the 10 years worth of data on those stations is that exceedances are pretty common for chlorides, and chlorides can be an indicator of road salt. So exceedances in chlorides, exceedances in sulfates, and exceedances in E. coli. We saw that for total phosphorus levels, results kind of hover around the provincial water quality objective, which is 0.03 milligrams per liter. But as you kind of move down in the system, you see increases in phosphorus. So it might be hovering around the PWQO in the headwaters of Finley Creek or Shields Creek, but when you get down below the confluence of those systems in the North Castor, it tends to increase a bit. When we looked at that seasonal Mann-Kendall trend test, what we found was increasing trends for chlorides and sulfates within Finley Creek in the North Castor River, but we didn't see any trends at all for Shields Creek. Although Shields Creek again we did see those exceedances that I talked about. And then another interesting thing was that we were seeing decreasing trends for total suspended solids and for iron within Finley Creek, both in that Finley Creek community and a little bit downstream below their stormwater management pond. So some of those exceedances and increasing trends are indicative of urbanizing environments. And again, I think one of the condition or recommendations that we have is trying to take is to take a better look at road salt applications within the city, within the upper parts of the watershed, because it does seem that they are impacting water quality. Next slide.
Can I ask a question there?
Sure.
Iron, where would the iron be coming from in the outflow of the stormwater pond?
So we saw decreasing trends for both total suspended solids and iron, both upstream of that stormwater management pond, right within the community of within the Finley Creek community, and then also downstream downstream of that swim pond. So I mean, this is an area that's in flux. There's going to be more development. The area that we have been sampling the last couple of years on Kelly Farm Drive, I believe that was one of the first areas built out. And so, you know, I was kind of wondering maybe that decreasing trend is because things have kind of stabilized in that area. But I'm not sure. I mean, again, trends could change as more development happens within that area. But
So you had said decreasing trends of suspended solids and iron.
Yes.
Not increasing. Okay, I
No.
thought it was increasing. All right. Okay.
So
A question
slide.
from Bill.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, Bill, your microphone is muted.
There, are we okay now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. We know that the municipality. Your concern is that the municipalities may be spreading salt that's getting in. We know that the demands of the people and the municipalities are to make sure the roads are passable and can be worked on. But when you pull these reports together, to whom do you send them, and are there any requests or suggestions when you send them, or is it just a straight report that goes out to, and how does it go out?
Michelle, did you want to answer that question?
Sure. So
Sorry, we're also going to get to that later in the presentation.
So maybe just quickly, I'll say that the reports we provide to the City of Ottawa, and like I said at the start, this report will form the basis for a sub-watershed plan, where we really provide those detailed recommendations, and that plan is then council approved. So, you know, the implementation of those recommendations could have things geared towards salt application. So whether it's a review of the salt application procedures, you know, ensuring that the right amount is put down for the, you know, for the area. And then it's also things like buffers, making sure we have adequate buffers along the water courses to filter that out from the runoff. So that's kind of where the recommendations really play an important part in these studies.
Well, the buffers aren't going to control sodium chloride, and I wonder how these recommendations filter down to the guys who are actually spreading the salt on the roads. And we notice in Leeds Grenville that they're just crazy about spreading whole carpets of salt all over roads, even when, you know, 3/8 of an inch of millimeter of rain is forecast, and it's just appalling sometimes. You know, the United Counties, the municipality here in North Grenville is fine, but the United Counties, they just slather it around. And I wonder how recommendations and consideration of road salt as a pollutant get down to the guys who are actually running the trucks.
That's valid for sure, Fred. I think that's an important point, is that you know, yeah, the recommendations, for these ones specifically, when you get to the sub-watershed plan, yes, it's council approved, but operationally, who takes that, and I think it has to involve that third piece, which is that monitoring plan, that implementation plan, where you really make sure that the people on the ground follow these things, or that, you know, if it's recommended that a review of salt management practices is undertaken, that it's actually done. So that's the tricky piece, but that's the important part, right?
Yeah, we find that the municipality tends to use well, not only salt more sparingly, but they often mix it with sand. And the counties doesn't seem to use sand at all. We don't see any sand in what they spread on the roads, and it's just like a 2 centimeters or more band of salt as you go around every corner in the middle of the road. Or it's not necessarily going to be really useful, but anyway, that's what we see. It's astonishing. So I think it's important, and we are guilty of having noticed it and not really been saying anything about it to the authorities. But I don't know. Somebody should question, as Fred says, what their criteria are and why. And what are the instructions to the people applying this stuff?
And what is their education system and their follow through? I understand and agree with what's been said.
Okay, I'll just add that it is sort of it's come up as an issue, I think, just within the last maybe 5 to 10 years, and you know, I have read of some municipalities looking at various best management practices and trying to look at environmental results in terms of impacts to groundwater and surface water. And I mean, that's something we could just do a quick literature review and see what's coming out of some of those studies in terms of recommendations and whether some of those BMPs are having good results. So one of the other tools that we use to review water quality is the specialized equipment where you can program it and deploy it for long periods of time in the rivers. And I really like these units. They give you very accurate results as long as they're calibrated and maintained well. They're fairly expensive though, so we have to really target where we put them and also make sure that they're protected when we deploy them. So they can capture several different parameters. So dissolved oxygen, turbidity, which is the clarity of water, conductivity, which is another sort of indicator of road salt, for example, and chlorides. It also does temperature, pH. So we deployed these units at a couple different locations within the catchment, and these are great because you can capture conditions over all different types of flow conditions. So captures information during storms, during base flow, and you can really see how water quality reacts to those different sort of flow regimes. Sorry, next slide. So in the report, we look at a number of different parameters. For the purpose of this presentation, I popped dissolved oxygen up there because it's one that is important. We know that certain levels have to exist to sustain fish and benthic invertebrates. So again, within the report, we look at DO at different locations, and it's interesting in that the location that we selected upstream, so I kind of wish I had a map on here too, but the location upstream within what we know now is sort of a cool water fisheries certainly had much better dissolved oxygen levels than the further downstream kind of warm water fisheries where and of course dissolved oxygen is correlated with temperature. So but this is the type of thing that we go over in the report for a number of different parameters. Next slide. I think it's Europe now, Brent, if I'm not mistaken there.
Yeah. Okay. So water temperature, another water parameter we looked at over the entire catchment was water temperature. So another method we could use to classify the streams. So this is an example of a graph we use. It's called a nomogram. And this is a type of graph that was, or not type of graph, this way of measuring water temperature and displaying it was developed in Ontario by our own Ontario scientists as well. So it's one that's used consistently across the province for comparisons. So we'll take a water temperature in the hottest part of the day, each day across the entire summer months, and we will plot that with the max air temperature that's reached on each of those days that we take a water temperature. And then each of those spots goes on the graph, and then we'll take an average of all the spots and plot it. So you'll see that's the red triangle there. And based on the lines, the colored lines, we can classify a stream based on its water temperature. So this specific spot in Andy Shields Park of Shields Creek fell right under the cool water classification. And this would be consistent with years prior that we've been doing this type of sampling. So Andy Shields or Shields Creek and Finley Creek at the very high ends, they came out as cool water streams. As you progress down the watershed and down the streams, the creeks do warm up. So these are important things for us to look at because they're predictors of the species compositions. So again, there's a cool water stream, we'll probably have cool water fish living in there. We can also use this to find groundwater upwellings. So if we were lucky enough to put our water temperature gauge right on top of one of those spots, we probably would have had even cooler results.
Brent,
Brent, we have a question from Kirk.
yeah, just a question. What depth do you measure that temperature? At the surface or down 2 feet or?
Yes, good question. There's not a specific, it's not a specific spot up or down in the water column. These are pretty shallow creeks, so we find the deepest pool we can find that has water moving through it, and we'll sink our temperature logger to the bottom of it in hopes that it stays wet the entire summer. Because these loggers drying out does happen in very dry years, because we're monitoring in some of the highest ends of these creeks where it's quite small.
Okay, thanks.
So we'll use this data for finding groundwater upwellings. It can predict stream shading based on this, or find where we need to plant more trees because the water temperature is higher. Thermal pollution, so things like stormwater ponds, they show up in these graphs where we'll have higher water temperatures downstream of those. Impoundments like beaver dams or big tree blockages where we'll have ponding of water upstream warming up, and that water chemistry influence. So like Kat said, this is water temps related to dissolved oxygen. So if we get a warmer water temperature, that can influence our water chemistry balance too. Next slide, please. So on water temperature, just a quick graph showing some of the results. Our first line there showing Finley Creek at Blay Road, the next downstream at Rideau Road, and then at the golf course where we monitored further downstream, we have a slow increase in temperature. This shows up in Shields Creek. You see upstream of Bank Street, quite cool, getting warmer as we go further downstream. And the same pattern kind of holding true through the North Castor River as well as Black Creek. And this is kind of common amongst streams across Ontario. As you get further down in the system, you're losing that influence of groundwater cooling the stream, and things warm up as you go downstream. Next slide, please. So another thing we looked at was our fisheries communities. So we've been monitoring this catchment for a number of years now, and so has the City of Ottawa. So through this report and the opportunity, we looked at the fisheries communities to see how things were faring over time, if the communities were shifting, and just a little insight on the results. Things seemed about the same as they've always been. So we did some sampling through this program. We didn't find any real changes in fisheries communities, other than in the past few years, we haven't been capturing some of our cold water species anymore in these creeks. So we used to have 2 species of sculpin that would show up in Finley Creek during routine sampling. This would be over 15, 16 years ago. We didn't capture them in our recent years of sampling, which may be because they're not there anymore because the creek warmed up, or because we didn't sample those spots where groundwater is coming up, where those fish are most likely to be found. Next slide, please.
Sorry about that. So just quickly, I believe I've talked before about the reference condition approach that we use for, again, another indicator of water quality. But the little critters that live in the stream bottom are really great indicators for water quality, and we'll go in and we'll sample their communities, see what's living there, and they can give you a really great indication of whether there's some impairment or whether the river is in good condition. Next slide. So we sampled a number of locations throughout the North Castor, and we didn't have any sites come back as being impaired. We have actually done a number of years worth of sampling on Finley Creek. Rhonda, I don't know if you can just highlight the two dots sort of along Finley Creek there. So we do have multiple years worth of data along Finley Creek there, and we have actually seen insect communities kind of change over time, but 2019 results, we're showing them as sort of not in reference condition, but sort of but also not impaired. Shields Creek, we had one site come back in reference condition, the other site come back as possibly impaired. I know, Fred, that's the location where that salamander in the past that you were talking about. So that one I was actually pretty surprised at. I'm not quite sure. I don't know if it was an impact maybe from kind of drought conditions that year, but sort of as we move down further in the system, the two sites lower down on the North Castor, those sites were sampled in an area that does have really good riparian cover, and those sites came back as in reference condition. So next slide.
Okay, so kind of the next steps on what we do with all this data. So we have knowledge now on the benthic invertebrates, the water quality, the fish, the habitat in this entire catchment. From that, we in the report we looked at past projects that have been completed in this catchment, past objectives that were set for the environment in this area, and we looked at past opportunities and whether or not these things have been completed. So there was a Shields Creek Watershed study done in 2004, as well as a North Castor report done in 1998. We went through those documents and we evaluated now in 2020 what out of those documents and lists of objectives have we completed or have we not. And we provide this to the City of Ottawa so they know what's done and what's still left to do. On that, we also identified some new opportunities and things that we will suggest to the City of Ottawa so that they can use into the future and their future plans based on changing land uses over these years. We also provided a whole suite of projects, and we prioritize them for the city too. So we prioritize them based on a scheme that's in the literature that starts on the left side there by protecting habitat. Of course, the best thing we can do is protect what we have left for the environment in this area. The second way we prioritized was to look for projects that would remove migration barriers. So in-stream impoundments, dams, debris, whatever could be stopping the movement of organisms within those aquatic systems. Our third prioritization was to restore watershed processes such as things like sediment control through erosion and riparian planting. And then our fourth level is providing in-stream habitat enhancements. So after the first three have been accomplished, then we would look at projects that would do this type of work. And that, like I said, that's based off of a scheme that is outlined in the literature for undertaking restoration projects. Next slide, please. So what's next? We took a look at everything we learned about the North Castor subwatershed, and we addressed, or we looked for data and monitoring gaps of things we didn't know. So as we talked about, we found some trends in chlorides. So we thought we'll suggest the city road salts. They need to be studied better and figured out. We need to answer some questions as to why we're seeing increasing trends. Water budgets also came up. How much water goes through this system? How much is leaving our system through groundwater upwellings or groundwater recharge in the area? We need to better understand how much water is in the system. And that ties in good to the next point, climate change. So we need to know better and predict better what's going to happen to this catchment into the future with respect to water in these streams. And then the last, or another main one, was wetland evaluation. So as we said, or Kat was showing the map, quite a few unmapped and undelineated wetlands in this area. To protect those better into the future, we suggest that they be evaluated and delineated so they can be properly managed. So with all this data, we packaged it together in this report, and that's going to be given to the City of Ottawa so that they can then create their more planning document, which is a subwatershed plan for this area that will hopefully inform their local official plans, development patterns and land use into the future, and trickle down all the way to things like stormwater management and how close things are actually built to these streams, or how stormwater is dealt with with all these individual developments. Next
A
slide.
question, if I may, Bill, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to the last slide. Could you give us an example of number 4, in-stream habitat enhancements?
Yeah, so an example of that would be maybe we wanted to improve some fish habitat in stream. We would do something such as add some sort of habitat enhancement. That could be as simple as throwing a pallet that's weighted down by rocks into a creek to give some cover to the fish and benthic invertebrates. So it's a good project, but in terms of prioritizing and how much impact that will have on the entire system, it's quite low. So that's low on our priority list, is a project like that.
Thank you.
All right, and I'd like to say that one of the things I'm noticing this year as something to look at is the effects of the increasing frequency of drought. And, you know, sort of since the 1999 drought, it seems that we've had really dry summers about every other year or more. And maybe something that everybody should be doing is looking back in their data for long-term trends, like in the brush across the road from us. It seems that the Manitoba maples are dying out, and more drought-hardy buckthorns are taking over. And in the creek here in Bishop's Mills, it seems that the Pyganodon mussels are becoming less frequent, and the Lasmagona compressa and the Elliptio complanata are taking over, and at least the Elliptios are very hardy for living without water for months when the creek is dry. So I think it's important in terms of climate change to see if we can find trends in our data that go back decades and that correlate with changes in the climate.
Thanks, Fred. So just to move on about so in terms of recommendations, so some of the examples of projects we've done in the past, especially in the North Castor system, we were fortunate a number of years ago to have some funding from the City of Ottawa, separate from the Catchment Studies, to do actual on-the-ground projects. So we had identified some opportunities in the field while we were doing all of our sampling and our monitoring, and they were prioritized. And so this one came up. It was a migration barrier. So that was kind of the number 2 there on the list that you saw. So what we had seen was that there was these low-level culvert crossings along the North Castor River, and in speaking with the landowner, they weren't being used anymore. They weren't useful or necessary, and the landowner was keen and willing to work with us to remove those. So we were able to take out those culverts, clean up that crossing, and be able to restore fish passage in that area in times of lower water. And the neat thing about this project too is that it also involved multiple departments or teams at South Nation. So it was a nice integrated project. So we were able to look at the impact that this would have on the catchment and be able to work through that together. So we're continually monitoring these projects and going back and seeing how they're doing, and if we have to make adjustments as necessary, we'll do that. So there was 2 sections along the North Castor where low-level crossings were removed. And next slide. Another one, this one I guess could tie into number 1 where the habitat's protected. Fortunately, this section of Shields Creek just upstream of Andy Shields Park is owned by the City of Ottawa, and it's kept as a natural space. And the aerial photos there, you can see the top one is from 2014. And you can really see, especially on the north side of the creek, how the adjacent landowner was farming almost right up to the edge. And so we were able to work with that landowner, with the City of Ottawa. We had secured some funding to be able to improve that buffer to 30 meters on that northern edge. So you can see in the 2019 imagery, thanks Rhonda, where the landowner is now cropping further back. So we did this by planting especially large caliper trees along that 30-meter edge, so that it was very obvious for the farmer where the edge was, where the boundary was, and stakes were put out as well. We had it surveyed professionally, and then we infilled with shrubs and other trees and everything on that north side. And it'll be interesting to see in in years to come how that buffer matures and how it does well on that northern side. And then we did some work on the southern side as well. We beefed up the buffer in certain areas there. A recreational pathway was put in for that subdivision on the south, and we worked with the city parks staff also to limit how much mowing they're doing along that pathway. They do have a policy in place. They have to mow a certain distance on either side of the path, but we really made sure they limit that to just what's absolutely necessary. And then if you look on the far right side of that photo, there's a section of kind of open grass area where we were able to do some pollinator habitat in that area. So we were able to spread some native wildflower and grass seed mix in that area and get a nice meadow habitat established there. So it was a kind of, I guess, two-pronged project where the area is being protected for the future, but then we were also able to do some enhancements. And part of the work in stream was erosion control. There were some areas that were identified that had some erosion issues, and we were able to use bioengineering in those sections, which was great. So some new techniques for us, and we're following up with this one as well to see how it's doing. And even the spring after, it looked to be faring very well. We had native vegetation coming up in those bioengineered areas, so it was working very well. So we're going to keep our eye on this one as well, and look to it as an example of what can be done in other areas.
Thank you all. Just a point of housekeeping, I have somebody connected by phone. You're currently muted. It's 989-2235. If you can unmute and just identify so we make sure we have the record of who's in the call. Again, it's 989-2235. To unmute your line, press *6.
Yeah, it's Ed, Rhonda.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ed. I wasn't sure because you're in twice, but we just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
No problem.
And *6 will mute you again. All right, so we have a recommendation that the Fish and Wildlife Committee receive and file the catchment study update on page 11. Just need a mover and seconder for that recommendation.
Well, I'll just say that that's very impressive work, and maybe we should receive and file and congratulate rather than just receiving and filing.
Thank you, Fred.
Okay, we'll make that change. Can I suggest Abraham move and Ed second, if that's okay? Abraham moving and Ed seconding. And Mr. Chair, you can go ahead and call the question.
Instead of just waiting. It's like.
Okay. Mr. Chair, you can call the question if there's any opposed.
Okay, are any opposed?
Seeing none, we'll move on to the report on page 13 and consider that carried.
Sorry, Rhonda, maybe if I can just add, once we have the report finalized, then we'll be able to share copies of that report with the committee if they're interested as well. So you can look at all the details in there once it's all done.
Thanks, Michelle. The report on page 13, we lost both Sandra and Omar, but Omar gave a good summary of the low water conditions in our opening slide deck. So the report just, again, has the same information that was provided in the slide. So again, we still have technically a couple of watersheds that we've not moved out of low water conditions yet. So water response team is meeting next week to look at the data for the month of August. And as Omar mentioned, the conditions are improving, so we will likely see downgrading of the watersheds that are still in level 1 and level 2 to either out of low water or down to level 1 conditions. So again, that meeting will happen next week, and we'll update our our social media platforms and website once that decision has been made by the water response team. So again, you had most of the material presented to you in the slideshow, so just looking for a motion to receive and file the update report in your package. Ed has his hand up, so I'm going to assume, Ed, you are moving that. Did you have a question to go with it?
He's just waving.
You?
Okay, thank you. And a seconder? Kirk? Thanks, Kirk.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and so I'll just say that we had 142 millimeters of rain in Bishop's Mills, and so it's
From when to when?
well, since the 23rd of August when things started to pour. And I've heard from Justin Roberts at the RVCA that they had 140 millimeters in a couple of hours up on the Tay River. So it's certainly been the fastest breaking of a drought that I can ever remember. And so if anybody's opposed, I mean, the low water conditions are extinct, and if anybody's opposed, they could speak up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll assume that's a carried motion as well. We do not have a supplemental agenda. Number 10 on our agenda is watershed monitoring reports, and I did see a few circulated by email prior to the meeting. So we have Fred's, I think something from Ed and something from Kirk. So again, Fred circulated the forms to committee members by email prior to the meeting. If you have watershed reports to send in, they are greatly appreciated. Especially this year with some of the work we're doing on our natural heritage study, the observations for wildlife and things like that will be information that our staff will be very interested in looking at when they look at that study, which they will provide an update to you at the November meeting. So Chair, did you have anything to add on the watershed reports?
No, just urge people to, if you don't want to fill them out in full detail, you can sort of strip the headings out and put them in the body of an email. But it's really useful to have these things from different parts of the watershed, and it certainly was a summer of very diverse conditions.
A lot of interesting things going on that might have been surprising. So it's important to hear from people in different parts.
Thank you. The date of our next meeting is November the 24th. It will be the same platform that we're using today. So again, we'll have contact information to you closer to the meeting date, but it is the 24th of November. And unless anyone has anything else, Mr. Chair, we can find a mover for adjournment.
Bill so moves.
Yeah. And I'm just going to stop our recording and
thank you so much to everyone that had comments and the staff. Fred was right. The report was excellently done. I would like more discussion of that sometime in the future, but that's another project.
Thank you. All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Rhonda?